517 cubic inches. Look at the time, 8:25 for Fisher. He has that pink Chevelle really cooking.
Picking up where we left off last time, you know, what was the event or the trigger that made you say, I'm gonna transition away from street racing and actually build a real race car that has a chassis and is set up for racing at the track?
I just think it was just like a transition that everybody makes. You know, a lot of people want to go faster and faster, and you know, there's a limitation to small street tires back then. Tires are not what they are today. So it was a lot of, you know, running, you know, like 1432s, you know, that was like the big tire to run back then. And so I wanted to run that and possibly go a little bit faster, thinking that I was going to do that, you know, turn up the nitrous.
Right. And when you were putting that car together, what were you thinking you were going to do with it? Was there a class that you were aiming towards, or did you not really know? You were just kind of building something and hoping something comes along, or what was the thought process?
Well, initially I just thought, well, I'm just going to build a car and just maybe just go fast with it, you know, even if there wasn't really much of a class, because really back then there wasn't anything. Nobody did anything heads up. You know, the first thing that did come along was NMCA, but that was still years down the road. And so I decided just to build it, you know, make it happen. I always ran that 400 small block, which I had great success with it. And I realized that there's no substitution for cubic inches. And all the people that had 350s, I could outrun them with lesser of a motor, being still a 400 small block. So I seen a lot of people transition into a 400 small block because they wanted to get that horsepower. And so I thought to myself, I wonder what a big block would be like, you know, and that's what made me think, okay, I'm going to put these big tires on it. I can put more power to it because, you know, a big block's going to make more power. And so I built a 454 and put a big camshaft in it and bought a set of Merlin heads back then, because back then that was, you know, steel set of Merlin heads was like supposed to be really good. And of course back then there was not really that many performance add-ons, again, like there is today. And so we put those on, and even they had a transition period because they had D runner exhaust, and then they had the oval exhaust. So they sent me one head that was a D port, and then one head that was an O port, like an O, you know. And we were thinking about just cutting it into a D, but it was like the grinding on that was just incredible. So I ended up selling that one head. Somebody else went and bought the head that's like that, and we just bought another D port exhaust head, which the Ds were like a copy of the Chevrolet head, you know, because they ran a D port on the exhaust.
Right.
And that worked out for a little while, and then I sold the heads and got me a set of Chevrolet heads from Chevrolet that were actually, you know, aluminum heads, and I thought they were awesome heads. We ran nitrous on that with initially we ran the 454, and which I got an opportunity to get a 502, so it was kind of a trade money swap type scenario. And so I got a 502 and I put those heads on it, and I was running nitrous back then, put a tunnel ram on it with 2 dominators, and it was just interesting, you know, to run that and see what it was like. You know, had the tubbed rear end, you know, the narrowed running the big slicks and everything, and I thought that was a lot of fun, you know. And
right.
And then that was
And how did that first 454 compare to the small block 400s that you were running in the 80s?
I mean, it run good, just like the 400. It's just that it made more power, made more torque. So you could do a lot of different things. You know, when you got something that has a lot of torque, it gives you more things that you can do with the torque converter and different gear ratios, because torque just changes the way you tune. And the 454 gave me that, and it was like learning a whole new thing. Just like when I went to the 502, that was a whole nother change again.
Right. And then eventually that motor evolved into the 509 that you ran naturally aspirated for a while.
Yeah, I didn't mean to say 502. I meant to say 509. Yeah, no, it's 509 is what I had, because it was a 4.5 bore with a 4-inch stroke crank, and that's what made it 509, not 502. I'm thinking of the
Right, the other Chevelle.
Right. Yeah, but no, it's 509, and then we evolved. I bought another crankshaft for it. I got a really good deal on a 3/8 stroke crank, and put that in there, and wow, that was a world of difference.
Right. Because that made it a 555, but that came way later, towards the end of running the nitrous program. But going back to the car, who initially was the person that was putting that car together? Who built the chassis and stuff like that?
Well, we started out, me and Dan Curry, we put together a shop and had Danny Adams work at it, doing, you know, like wheel tubs and, you know, sheet metal work, some sheet metal work, a lot of little race car stuff. And so I had Danny Adams do a lot of the work that went into it, and he was the original person that got the car started, I would say.
And Danny Adams is now working for Cameron Johnson at his chassis shop, building cars. Yeah, that's funny how that all evolved. So so when you were putting that car together, obviously the decision came from somewhere to come up with the color for the car. So what exactly happened that got you to land on that color that nobody can seem to agree on what the name is?
Well, what happened, the color of the car originally was like a burnt orange, and I just thought it was a really cool color. When when it was brand new paint and you had clear on it, you buffed it out and looked it real good. It was deep and it looked really good, had some good metallic in it. And so through the years, I had my own mechanical shop, and then I had my own paint shop, and we had our own mixing bank. And so we decided one day, I said, I want to try to come up with this burnt orange color, because they had like so many variations of this burnt orange. And so I go to the mixing bank, and a couple of the paints that's on the mixing bank are tints. And so I looked at these tints and I started dabbing some of it on some paper, just looking at it on this cardboard. And I thought, wow, now what a cool color that is. So then I went out to the shop with the tint and I dripped a few drips on the car, kind of spread it around a little bit. And I thought, that's a cool looking color. But the problem with it was a single stage color that we ended up with. You can't paint the car with tints because they're just tints. And so we ended up having to create the color using the tints. We finally got the color that looked as close as it did to the tint. And when we painted it, initially it looked totally awesome. It's just once it got out in the sun and the sun started beating it up, it would go from this beautiful fuchsia type color.
Red almost.
Yeah, it's kind of a funky purplish red. The sun would get to it and kind of lighten it up. So that was the only downside of it. And I thought if I put some clear coat on it, it'd probably protect it from the UV rays, keep it from bleaching out the paint. But when it was first painted, it was beautiful. And I ended up painting that car like a couple of times because we had mishaps. Front end would get damaged or the doors would get damaged, and we just ended up painting the whole car and it'd look good all over again,
Right.
But that's how we ended up with it.
Because the sun would fade it and it would turn into that pink that everybody.
Yeah, a lot of people sit there and go, oh, that's the pink Chevelle. Well, it's pink now. It wasn't pink 3 months ago.
Right. So it was I think the closest thing to it was like a Mopar color.
A lot of people equated it to that. Yeah, that or that there's some other plum crazy purple or something like that.
Yeah.
They're equating it to that color, and everybody had their opinion, you know. And a lot of people just said, "Oh, that pink Chevelle." Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't really pink, but close, you know.
Right. So, once you had the Chevelle that was naturally aspirated with the 454 and the 509, initially you were just bracket racing with the car because nothing really existed back then. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, comes this class called Pro Street DOT. So who was involved with that, and how did that class even come about?
Well, there was a guy that came over from Sweden. His name was Shell, and he wanted to create this street car environment. So he had a bunch of Swedish people come over, and the majority of the classes that he had all ran slicks, and he had a few street tire stuff that were slower classes and stuff. But when I first went out there, that was my first involvement in racing it. NMCA came out about that same time, roughly, but I never ran the DOT. I never ran any of the stuff that NMCA ran. The races were kind of far away, and they, you know, just never did it. But I ran Shell's class, and I did it a couple of years in a row, and it was a lot of fun because it was heads up. That's what I liked, you know, heads up. First one to the finish line wins.
Right, and he was the one that got that whole thing kicking off over in Orlando, because 1993 was the first year for that event, and he was the one that put it together.
He was the one that really started it, not Carl. Carl took credit for it, saying that he was the originator and he invented it. He just stole it from Shell, is what he did.
Right. So it evolved from there, and then the DOT class got really popular because the allure of it was you had these heads-up cars, and they were running DOT street legal tires back then.
Yeah, the class, there was some classes that came out, and we just chose to go the direction of the DOT tire. And back then they had these M&H tires, and those things were rock hard. And they would swear up and down, oh, these things are like slicks. Those things are nothing like slicks. Those things are like Grand Ams in their worst form. Like dried out Grand Am tires that's been sitting out in the sun. That's what these were like. So you had to really baby the throttle. When you're leaving, it was tough. I mean, it was a game because we had no assistance.
It grew, the class grew, and Super Chevy took on their own version of it.
Well, what happened, I tell you, you know, I was hearing about Super Chevy, you know, they're all running Pro Mod, and they ran some bracket classes. That's how they started. And then up north in Super Chevy, you know, Dan Richenberg got together with Jeff Miller, and the two of them, because they were kind of doing like, hey, you know, we're fast DOT cars. You know, that was the class. DOT was a bracket class, is what they turned into. And they said, let us just run some exhibition runs. And, you know, kind of like a heads up thing. There's 6 of us here, we can do it. And, you know, there was 2 guys that owned it. You know, it was Phil and Roger. And they decided, well, you know, what the heck, we'll let you do some exhibition runs.
Heads up.
Heads up. And the crowd went nuts because these were not Pro Mods. These were like regular cars. I mean, there was nothing Pro Mod about them. And the people could relate to that, to those cars. And that's what made it so popular. And because it became so popular, they said, okay, you guys can do your own race. So they actually gave the people who would sign up the ability to run heads up with DOT street tires, which was the M&Hs back then.
Right, and back then, you know, the majority of people were running the nitrous just like you were, so it really added to the street car look for a lot of those.
Absolutely.
A lot of those people. I know back then, you know, you messed with it. You didn't really get into all that hard until later on, but you did have some pretty decent success with the 509 with the nitrous motor, because you're at Gainesville and you ended up breaking a record at the Super Chevy show with that.
Yeah, what happened, I can tell you that the whole story from front to back was Dan Richenberg's dad, and I didn't even know who Dan Richenberg was back at the time, and I was selling racing fuel, and he needed some C16. So his dad came over to the house, and he was showing me a Super Chevy magazine. He goes, look what Dan did. This is my son. He ran a 904, and when he's going back, he's going to be 890s this weekend at Super Chevy. And I was like, I need to go. I got to get there. And you know, I had a single plate nitrous. This was back when I had the I'm trying to think, the 509, I think it was. Yeah. And so I had that single plate nitrous on there. I had very little experience with it. You know, a buddy of mine who kind of knew a little bit more about it than I did, he just said, here, run these pills, this bottle pressure, you'll be good to go. Okay. And I went out there and not knowing exactly what to expect, I let go of the button and ran like an 885 or 882 or something like that. I was like, when I got that time ticket, I was floored. I couldn't believe it. I said, what? I went that fast first time out? There's no way. I was like shocked. And back then, there wasn't any street cars going that fast. That's why they made such a big deal. You know, Super Chevy made a big deal out of Dan Richenberg running street tires, running a 904. They were saying this was done on street tires, not slicks. And here I did it, and I was like surprised. I still got the time ticket. I mean, it was.
So you were the first street car of that era into the 8 seconds.
Yeah, until somebody else down the road did it. But yeah, that was like the first time, and I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool, you know?
Right. And then the nitrous program evolved. You know, the car got more radical. Like you were saying, you put a Dominator, 2 Dominators on a tunnel ram. It got more kits and everything like that, which actually, funny enough, is what led you into getting into trouble and ending up doing the Flowmaster poster, which was...
Well, that's the thing. I decided to go to a tunnel ram with 2 Dominators with 3 nitrous kits. And I thought, okay, this would be cool. You know, they're going to spray bar down the middle. You had the 2 nitrous plates on the carburetors, and we had the fogger. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be cool. I'm going to be like all the Pro Mod people, right? So I send this thing off to this place in California. They put it all together for me, send it back. I bolt it on the car. And, back in the day, in that time, I had my own auto repair shop. And we used to use Bosch relays all the time. Didn't think nothing of it because we thought these Bosch relays were like the best, Bosch. I mean, come on, they're on Porsche, Mercedes, all that stuff. So I'd let go of the button and the first kit would work great, but when it came to the second kit, it just would fall on its face or it would stutter and blubber, and I mean, it was just a mess. I couldn't figure out what it was. And somebody came up to me and said, hey, I see you got all Bosch relays down there running your nitrous kits. And I said, yeah. He goes, you got to get rid of those things. You got to put these continuous duty compressor relays in. I was like, what? That ain't going to make no difference. And he goes, I'll give you one since you won't go buy one. And he gave me 1 relay. He goes, really, you should run 1 relay per kit, but go ahead and you can hook all 3 of them in there. It'll fix your problem. He goes, the nitrous, I can hear it. He says, I can hear it. And I didn't know much about nitrous, and I didn't know what to hear. But he said, I can hear it fluttering because the solenoid, the plunger's not staying open. And he says it's just banging against the internal part of the solenoid. So I was like, all right. Well, I didn't put it on then. I waited because I was going to go to my next race, which is going to be that Atlanta race, and we're in Lakeland. and we're testing and everything, and I thought, man, I still can't get this thing to. I'm trying different stuff, being stubborn, not wanting to change that relay. Well, here it is, 11 o'clock, and I said, there's a curfew. We better change this relay if we're going to figure this out. Well, it ended up being a little bit more wiring than I expected. So here we are. We got it done like 15 minutes before. By the time we got everything put away, got the car pulled up to the staging lane, Doug, who owned the racetrack at the time, said, can't run the car. It'll cost me $2,500 if you go down the track after 12 o'clock. And I was just like, oh, come on, seriously.
You were friends with Doug.
I was friends with Doug. Yeah, Doug and I, we talked all the time. And but he wouldn't let me go down the track. He said he just didn't want to pay that penalty. And I was like, all right, whatever. So I loaded the car up, got it in the trailer, and we left that night from Lakeland and went to Atlanta. And
an NMCA race.
I think it was an NMCA race, yeah. And I went out there, and first pass, I did the burnout, got everything going, and we had the slicks on the car, no street tires. I had the 1432s on it, and
yeah, because NMCA wouldn't let you run street
they
tires.
would, yeah, they would not. You were not allowed to run street tires because they said it wasn't proven. Slicks are proven. I was like, all right, whatever. But I had the slicks in the trailer because the rollout on the slicks was the same as the street tires. I was good with it. So I said, all right, we'll put them on. So we had the slicks, went out there, staged the car, let go of the button. I was like, wow, this thing feels better. I'm thinking this. This is like going through your mind at 100 miles an hour, and you're going, wow, you let go of because it was off the gas pedal. So when you let off the button, the first stage was on. And when that first stage came on, that car felt really good. I thought, wow, this is feeling pretty good. And then the second stage was on the button. So what happened is when the car would start to level out, because it always carried the wheels a little bit on the front, when it started to level out or come back down, I was using the weight of the car to hit the second stage. I hit the second stage and I was like, oh my God, this thing feels too good, because it didn't go down. It didn't continue to go down to go forward. It went forward and up even more. And I was like, you got to be joking. And man, next thing I know is like something caught underneath the car. I don't know if it was more power kicked in or what it was, but it went up on the back bumper. And I could feel it slam hard. And back there was my wing and my parachutes. And I knew it damaged the wing. I knew it damaged the parachutes, because they wouldn't let us run wheelie bars with street tires. They said, if you're a street cars do not have wheelie bars. So I had no wheelie bars. If I had wheelie bars, it'd been a different story. But that car came down, and it came down hard. And I thought, oh my God, here we go. And it just, the throttle was stuck halfway open. I'm just going down the track, probably at 100 miles an hour. I get down to the other end, I just shut the car off and coast. Get the car back to the trailer. The headlights are out of it. The shocks went through the control arms because the front suspension was all stock. The bars were pushed through the firewall. It bent the firewall. It messed up the whole car. I ended up having to cut the front of the car off, and that's when I had to finish making the car a full chassis because of that wheel stand. But it was all because of that relay. I just did not know what to expect. I did not expect the car to do what it did.
Right, and then after the wheel stand happened, you had Dennis, who was working for you, helping you with the car. He said he went and found the pictures at the event that the photographer took.
Yeah, that Saturday, the track official came over, like as if he needed to tell me, you can't run this car until you have it inspected, and I mean, you have to take it to a chassis shop to have it inspected. I was like, it's messed up. I'm not going to run it. But the guy parked next to us was Ed Hoover, and we decided, because Ed needed help, and we thought, we're just going to hang out with Ed. He runs Pro Mod, and so we're just going to hang out with him for the weekend and see what he's like and what he's doing. And next thing I know, here it is Sunday morning, and here comes Dennis, yelling and screaming, hey, look at this, and he brings these huge, like, 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot poster board pictures of the car, and it's all different, stages of the car lifting the wheels up off the ground. He goes, "You ain't gonna believe this. Look what the camera guy with his motorized camera got these pictures." And I was like, wow, not only were they good, clean, clear pictures, but I couldn't believe that somebody caught that, and with the mufflers and everything. And then in the background, you could see in the tower, it said Dynamax. I thought, oh, how funny is that?
Yeah.
But, that was pretty cool. And then there was another guy at the racetrack that I met, Rick Dyer.
Yeah.
And Rick came over to me, and he goes, "Oh, man, you're going to be famous." And I just laughed, and I said, "For what, being stupid? How you get famous off of something like this?" And he goes, "No, Flowmaster is going to use that picture because you got their exhaust, and it is exactly what they have, down to the pipes, down to the header portion that actually welds onto the header. I mean, it couldn't be a better advertisement." And I'm like, all right. He goes, "Well, Richard Small's going to call you. You watch, he'll be calling you probably next week." Well, sure enough, 3 weeks later, I get a phone call from Richard Small. And he's calling me up, and he goes, "I got those pictures, and I'm impressed." And I said, "Yeah, it was pretty cool, kind of expensive, but pretty cool." He goes, "I'm going to make you famous." I was like, I heard that before. But no, it was pretty cool. I mean, we made an agreement on what I was going to get out of it and what he was going to get out of it, and we both ended up with a pretty good deal on it. And the posters did work out good. It actually, a lot of people know me because of that poster, which is kind of cool,
Right. Yeah, and it was mainly all just because of a nitrous solenoid that just was the culprit.
Miscalculation, not really understanding nitrous or how it works or what to do. It's just, you're listening to 50 people and only 3 of them know what they're doing,
Right. Yeah, and then tailing off what you said earlier, because you ended up working with Ed Hoover at that race, helping him run his car at that event. You actually became friends with Ed Hoover and actually went back and forth on nitrous stuff with him because he was running Pro Mod.
Yeah, he was a very innovative person, always creating a new design nozzle, or trying to, like the plenum bars. He'd run bars through the center of the tunnel ram, and he would create different designs and jetting and stuff like that to help atomize the fuel, because the whole point of it was to get the nitrous to atomize the fuel, and that would make more power, or atomize the nitrous more than what it is. And it was like the more you could turn that nitrous into a gas and the fuel into a vapor, that is where the power was made. And he came up with some pretty crazy nozzles, and he would invert the jets. He'd run them backwards, and you just have to get the ratio right. But you want to talk about making some serious power, because on the nozzles, he would run the nitrous into the fuel, and when it would hit, it would help atomize the gasoline into a vapor, and it made a big difference. I was really impressed. But I mean, he did a lot of innovation. He and I would work together and talk about stuff, and he was a smart guy.
Yeah, you even went over to his house one time.
A long time ago, yeah.
Yeah, and he's showing you what he was doing with an intake manifold, and he's spraying nitrous in his shed in the backyard, and you can't even see anything.
Yeah, it's like you don't realize how much nitrous is sprayed out that manifold. It leaves a huge cloud. It's amazing how much of a cloud it leaves.
Yeah. So after the wheel stand, the car hit another evolution point because the car had to be fixed. The whole car had to be changed over. And around that time, which was 1995, is when the car ended up turning into the blower car. Granted, the wheel stand happened in 93. You kept running nitrous a little bit after that, but in 95 is when you made the transition into the blower motor, what pushed you in that direction? What got you into that? Or
two things. One thing was I've always wanted a blower because I just thought blowers were cool. I liked the whistle, and I just thought they looked cool, and that's why I wanted it, you know. Oddy came up to me at a race, and that was Jim Oddy, and that's all he ran in Pro Mod was his blower. And you could look up Jim Oddy and just look at his history, and his success was insane. And he came up to me, goes, "You need to get rid of that motor you got and put a blower motor in there, and I can show you how to go fast." And I was like, not that was really the turning point for me, was him saying that. It was just the fact that here's a guy willing to talk to me about something that I always wanted. So between those two things, he told me, he goes, "I'll tell you what parts I need, and what you don't send me, I'll put together and give you a heck of a deal." And his whole motivation is because I was going to the Super Chevy races, but nobody had a blower motor that ran good, that he in Pro Street DOT, other than Jeff Miller, but he wanted something that was his. So we went out there, went to New York where he was at, and put the whole deal together, got it on a dyno. He showed me how to tune it, and he said, "Because we're going to be at the same race, I'll help you tune it." I thought, okay. And I mean, now get this. This is a 509, because he says, "You don't want a big crankshaft, it's going to make too much torque." He goes, "You got those tires you got to work with." And this is a 509 that it shifted at 6,800 RPM. This is where we shifted the motor, okay? At 6,800 RPM. I'm talking about like Chevrolet motors from the factory would shift that on a stock motor.
Right.
Now, we had a 1471 that was made by BDS. And he told me, he goes, "This is a competition blower that BDS makes. It had stripping in it, and it was 120 high helix, you know, the whole game." And he goes, "You got a really good blower." He goes, "You're going to make good power." And I'm just like, okay. And when he told me about the RPM at 6,800, it's going to shift, and then the chip that we put in the box so the valves won't float at 72, he goes, "Don't let it go up against that because it'll pop the burst panel." And I'm just like, oh man, this doesn't, how are you going to go fast at 68? That doesn't make sense. Sure enough, we got on the dyno. He shifted that thing on the dyno at 6,800 RPM and made 1,800 horsepower. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Nitrous motors aren't making that kind of power, or the torque at 1,400 foot-pounds of torque. No nitrous motor back then was doing it, because you got to remember, back then they didn't have big motors. I mean, back then, I mean, if you had a,
632.
Yeah, 632. That was the regular motor that everybody ran. They didn't start creeping into the big motors yet. And I tell you, man, that was incredible. I got that motor in that car. Oh my God.
Yeah, and you had to spend a considerable amount of time changing over that whole car to accommodate that.
Yeah, we had to change the exhaust. We had to change a lot of stuff. We had to change wiring. Dennis used to hang out with me, and we used to go racing all the time. We met at Lakeland. He was racing his car at Lakeland. He had a Firebird or Camaro, something like that, and he was killing it, racing everybody over there. And that's where I met him at, and he said, "Yeah, let's hang out. You and I go racing. I'll go racing with you." And he would travel with me. He'd go all over the place racing. And but that guy was dedicated. I tell you what, he made a big difference in the racing program because of how much dedication he had. And I tell you, he came over, I guess it was Friday, like about 4 or 5 o'clock. He started working on the car. I didn't get done working until like 5 or 6, and we did not stop until the next night. I mean, it was crazy. We were there, didn't sleep. Soon as it was morning, I guess it was 5 5 o'clock in the morning. We finally got done. We loaded everything up and went to Memphis.
Yeah. Memphis Super Chevy show at Memphis.
That was my first race with the blower motor.
Yeah, and the funny thing is you went to a race and you didn't even make a test pass yet.
No, went to the track untested. And I tell you, because I needed to make a test run just to see what it was like, I went to Phil and I said, hey, you think I could just drive the car down the track just this one time to see what it was like? I won't do anything crazy. I just want to go down and just make a drive, a fast drive. He was like, yeah, go ahead. And I went down the track and I had these racing seats, and these racing seats had a lot of foam in it. I mean, they're probably like 6 inches of foam. And I'll never forget it. As I'm easing into the gas pedal, because I didn't want to stab it, but I'm easing into the gas pedal to the point that, okay, now it's floored. I could not believe the torque that motor made and how much it was pushing me into the seat. And I was literally sinking back into the seat. I was like, oh my God, the nitrous motor never did that.
Yeah, because you didn't start flooring it till the 8th mile.
Yeah, well, it was past, on that run there, it was like past the 8th mile, and I was just like, oh my God, this is crazy. This is going to go fast.
Yeah, the mile an hour on that pass was higher than your best mile an hour ever on nitrous.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, yeah, that, yeah, 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 yeah.
That was the best sales pitch you ever had.
Oh yeah, I did 168 back in the day. You got to remember the cars were slower back then, but with a nitrous I did 168, almost 169 mile an hour, and I'm talking about as slow as I was going into it. I mean, we're driving it for the first 8th mile going into the throttle, and then floored it at the end and went the same mile an hour. I'm like, you got to be kidding! This is going to be fast, and it was crazy. It turned into something. It was a monster.
Yeah, and one thing that I think a lot of people don't really understand back then is, you know, because you said that the cars were slower. That was mostly due to the fact that there just wasn't a lot of technology, and it was probably worse so because you had a blower car, and there were no aids like there are today. Your car didn't even have a race pack in it back then.
Yeah, there was no race pack. There was no timing retards for the blower. There was timing retards that they had for nitrous. That was no problem. They had timers for nitrous and stuff like that, but nothing for a blower. Even I talked to Oddy. I said, is there something that we can do to change the timing, you know, to help control the car more? Because you're 100% controlling the car by the throttle, to where nowadays, today, you just floor it. And you let go of the button, and all you got to do is hold on to the steering wheel, because what's controlling the motor is no longer your foot. It's the timers, or the timing graph that you put into the computer. That's what controls the power to go down the track. So it's a whole different world compared to back then. I mean, you drove it by the seat of your pants, and you'd be like, okay, that felt good here. I could probably add a little bit more power, as long as the track conditions are good, as long as the weather is good, as long as there's no issues, you know.
Right.
Because you still had problems that you had to think about. So we would leave at 32 degrees, and you locked that distributor down, and that was it. It was no, you know, I don't even think the 6-shooter came out yet. You know, I think we didn't even have that yet. I think that was being developed. The only thing we had, I could remember in Gainesville talking to Scotty Cannon, and he was showing me how he put the throttle, air throttle, on his blower hat, and he was controlling the throttle, and he goes, that's all you got to do is put that on there, you'll be set to go. And I'm just like, all right, I'll try it. And I went and bought one and had it sitting in my garage, and I never put it on. It just, you know, Jeff Miller, I was asking Jeff, I said, what do? You know, how do you get your car to leave? His 60 foots were strong, you know. Right. And I was just like, how do you do it, Jeff? You know, and he was showing me how he did it with his foot. He built these little stops, and this would be the first stop, then his foot would slip off it, go to the second stop, and then he'd floor it, and that's how he went down the track. And I was just like, whoa. So I tried to invent the same thing. It's just not as easy as it looks.
Right, and even staging the car was not easy because you didn't have a 2-step either.
Because back then Oddy, because again it's all brand new stuff, Oddy says you don't want to put it up against a two-step because it popped the blower. And of course they did have problems because fuel would back up in the fuel system. And people didn't really understand a lot of stuff. They're still figuring things out, because you remember when you have a clutch car, you watch those old Pro Mods, the blower cars, they're leaving like at 6,000-7,000 RPM, and when they go to the starting line, they would stage, and all you'd hear next was the blower going, whoa, you know, and it was like, what slipped was the clutch because they're running Lincos. I mean, there was no such thing as a converter back then, no such thing as an automatic. It was all Lincos with clutches, and the clutch is what kept it from spinning because it slipped so much. So it was a whole different world from what it is today.
Yeah, but by comparison, you didn't have a Lenco with a clutch.
No, I had the equivalent of a Vega converter. That's about what it felt like, because the transmission fluid would be so hot it would burn the red color out of the transmission fluid, and I would have to change the fluid. So then I made a box that held ice, and the fluid would go through that because that was the only thing that could cool the transmission fluid. So that helped for a little bit, but it would still have a bad odor. And then I tell you what really made the difference. A customer came to me trying to sell me oil at my shop, and he goes, "This synthetic oil is the best thing on the planet. You got to try this stuff." And I'm like, synthetic nothing. Who wants synthetic anything? He goes, "Here's a case for free. Try it on me. You complained about your transmission not working. This will cure the problem." I'm like, I'll humor you. I put that stuff in that transmission. It blew my mind. I could not believe it. The fluid did not have any odor or any smell to it, and the fluid was perfectly pink, like nothing ever happened to it. And the car ran perfect. No more pulling the transmission out after 5 passes and having a burnt band or a burnt clutches, because we ran a power glide in the very beginning, and the clutches would get, you know, the steels would get hot spots in them, and the clutches would get burned up and stuff. And again, you know, we didn't even have very much in the way of transmission stuff. I mean, nobody made it except the guy in Canada. What was his name? API. But it was all parts. You know, you could buy, like, he would machine the drums so you could run the FMX clutches, which was a lot bigger and thicker. Some people ran those forklift clutches. You know, I know they fit and they work good, but they weren't as big as the FMX clutches, and the steels were thicker, so they could take a lot of heat. But I mean, we did what we could, you know, with a bigger, better pump. That we tried to get the pressure around 230 area, you know.
Right.
In the planetaries, he made the planetaries so they would live, but wasn't like what it is today.
So with the limited technology, what was it like staging a car back then, not having a two-step? All you really had was just a trans brake.
I knew that I could leave comfortably at about 3,000, 3,500 area. And the trick is to get it up on that number without going over it or not being enough. So you got your hand on the shifter, and you got your foot on the brake, and you got one on the gas, and you're just kind of just working it, trying to get it into the beams. And that was the trick, because you're trying to look at the tack at the same time and trying to get it into the beams, because I did not like going, you know, deep into the bulb. I like to stay back a little bit. And it was tough. It wasn't easy. And, you know, and it was just, don't get too excited about hitting the throttle, because it wasn't like I'd let go of the button and hit it, you know, because I'm only barely touching, you know, those blower motors, the butterflies barely open, you know, and they're 3,000 RPM. So you had to be real careful whacking the throttle. So I'd still be going into it slowly, you know. We got some tuning videos. You can watch the front tire just kind of bounce and kind of float on the track, you know. And that just was, it was tough to make that happen.
That was all your right foot.
Yeah.
Doing that.
Yeah.
You're
feeling the car, becoming one with the car, and just feeling, because the car would twist up, and when it got to a certain height, you know, don't hit the throttle much more. But I would see the mile-an-hour cone, and I'd be like, okay, I'm getting close to the mile-an-hour cone, because I knew when I got to the mile-an-hour cone, I could, at the 8th mile, I could floor it. And when I did, oh, now the game's on. It would.
Yeah. And that was how you won a lot of races. If it was 8th mile racing only, it really wouldn't have worked, but because it was quarter mile, you would always pass them at the top end.
Oh, Yeah, you could see that race that I raced with the guy in the Buick.
Yeah.
You know, he qualified, I think, third, and I qualified fifth or something like that. And we went out there, and I drove around him. He was out in front, and I drove around him at the top end. And I mean, it was a close race, but he was fast. He ran nitrous. You could see him. You could see the nitrous kits as he was hitting the nitrous kits. The wheels are coming off the ground as he's coming off. You know, as he's going down the track. And I floored it, and I drove around him.
So even with all the limited technology, you know, basically you're the one calling the shots every time the car is going down the track. You know, you're trying to stage this car, watch the tree, and watch the tachometer at the same time to try to make the car leave consistently, even with all of those, I guess technically you could call them limitations. You know, Jeff Miller had his own solution with putting pegs on his transmission tunnel. That was his physical feeling that he could use to know where he needed to be with the throttle. Even with all those limitations, you had really good success with the blower motor.
Yeah, we did. We had good success with it. I was really happy with it, and I wanted to go further with it, you know, and Jim was giving me some tune-ups, you know, telling me, hey, try this, try that. One thing that I kind of figured out, because we're looking at the CAD that was on the plugs, because we used to run the NGKs back then, and you could see where the CAD was not burned off. And he told me, he says, hey, look, you can burn some more CAD off and lean this thing out. And sure enough, when I started leaning that thing out, man, we went from 170 to 193, I think was the quickest mile an hour. And I'm doing with a converter that's slipping, because back then, Marty didn't exist back then, not like he does now, you know.
No Neil Chance NSX billet converter back then.
No, that didn't exist. He came out years later. But if I had his converter, if I had a transmission like they got now, a good 3-speed with a lockup, oh my Lord, I would have went 200. I would have went 200. That would have been crazy. Back then, yeah. I mean, you know who went 200 in a Pro Mod was for the first time, and it was around that same time. Bill Kuhlman. Bill Kuhlman was the first Pro Mod to go 200. Here I am going in a car that has street tires, you know, with a converter that's slipping.
Yeah.
You're going 100.
15 years later.
Yeah, going 193, 192 area, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that's just crazy.
Yeah, and at that particular point, that's when that Pro Street DOT class was really getting hot and heavy, because you had a lot of major players in it. You know, you had Jeff Miller, Freddie Davis, Ross Stomp was all a part of that.
Steele.
Yeah, Mike Steele, and Freddie Davis actually eventually converted to a blower motor because of Jim Oddy. Yeah. Kevin Vanderbeck did with the Hudson.
With the Hudson, yeah, he ran good too. But we used to run all the Super Chevy races, you know, which was, they mostly were on the East Coast, you know, north. We didn't run every single one of them, but we ran a vast majority. But we got a lot of video on that, and we won a few races on that. It was good. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and the fans really responded to that class really well.
They responded because the cars did not look all whacked out of shape. Because back then, Pro Mods, they were wacky looking cars. I mean, and they did it on purpose, making them look all stretched out and putting huge wings. I mean, wings that were just, I mean, would actually slow you down, you know. But it was just a thing back then. But people, a lot of the fans didn't, you know, regular people who liked racing that were just fans, they responded more to cars that looked stock because they related to those cars. You know, I had many people come up to me at the staging, in my pit, and they'd go, oh, I used to have one of these when I went to high school. You know, they were telling me that, you know, but they related to all those cars.
Right. And then, I mean, for as much success as you had winning a couple events here and there, you always seemed to qualify in the top 5, top 7, depending on who showed up, what event it was. There was always, you know, snags and issues. Chief among them, probably the worst one, was the crash at Bristol. So how did that happen?
Well, that wasn't good news. You know, we went over the whole car. I thought everything was okay, and I had some bad feelings the night before, thinking something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, and we got the car out. We're in Bristol, Tennessee, and I got in the staging lane, and I was racing Craig McCallum. I was in the left lane, he was in the right lane, and you could see that both staged, and I let go of the button, and I was like, yahoo! I look over to the right, and I'm ahead of him. I'm in front. And I was #1 qualifier, ET and mile an hour at that race. But he was the second, and he was close. And if I thought if I could put him out, I'm good, because the rest of them I could drive around all day, no problem. Well, I knew right about around the 8th mile area in Bristol, there's a little bump in the track. And all I had to do was, when I'd hit that bump, all I had to do is just take the steering wheel and just kind of hit it a little bit, and it'd keep the car straight. And I'm going down the track, I look over, I'm ahead, everything looks good, and I'm just cruising along. Here comes the bump. I turn the steering wheel a little bit, and I'm like, wait a minute. There's no steering. And I'm going down the track with no steering, and I'm like going, oh my God, this isn't good. But I want to win. So I'm looking over, and I'm still ahead of Craig, and I'm looking at the finish line. I'm looking at Craig, and I'm thinking, if I could just beat him, get across the finish line, I can fix the problem later. And as long as I don't hit the brakes hard, the car won't dart, because there's always that chance the car could follow the grooves in the track or just something like that. Problem was, the car started drifting to the right from that bump. And I'm thinking, damn, there ain't nothing I can do about this. You know, I'm kind of screwed. So next thing I know, I'm starting to cross the line, and I'm looking at the finish line. I'm looking at him, and I'm thinking, damn, I can almost do this if I could just get there. I couldn't get there in time, and I ended up bumping into him at the finish line, and you know, I had the chutes out and everything, and had no steering. I didn't, and the problem is, the shutdown goes around the mountain to the right. You know, back then the old Bristol, you know, went around the mountain, and I was just like, man, I don't know if I want to, what I want to do here. Do I slam on the brakes, or, you know, that could make me a hard left into the woods. Well, because the track went to the right, the car kept going straight. I ended up hitting a tree, and which that stopped me. But it didn't. The car slowed down enough, because I was working the brakes, just trying to, you know, not be too crazy with it. The chutes are out. So when I hit the tree, it didn't create too much damage. It wasn't bad. You can see on the wrecker how it was just a little bit of damage. I got it back to the shop. We fixed it. It was not that big of a deal.
Yeah, but the culprit was the steering linkage.
Steering linkage broke, and you know, being arrogant, thinking that you can still race and win. That was bad.
Yeah, 'cause you got back in the throttle.
Yeah, I did.
You just had to win, didn't you? Yeah. And then probably the best, you know, the highlight of it was at the very, very tail end, was winning at Bradenton, because we won the whole event at Bradenton that Shell put on.
Yeah.
And 1997, it was toward the very, very end.
Yes.
With the car.
Yeah, that was a good race.
That event.
Yeah, that was a good race.
Yeah, I still remember winning that event, and I still remember pushing the car onto the starting line. I couldn't have been probably maybe 5 years old, I think, at the time, and I remember the feeling of the glue on my shoes, and hearing my shoes come up off the glue for the first time.
Not realizing what you'll be feeling like in the future.
Yeah, it's just like a core memory. But you know, there was a lot of other interesting things, because the Super Chevy show involved a lot of traveling, you know, and we did that as a family. You know, pretty much everybody that was involved with the race car was either a really close friend or was related in some way, shape, or form. You know, and we always did a lot of traveling with the RV.
Yeah, we did, and the driving was tough, because I would end up doing all the driving, and then when we get to the track, I had to do all the race car driving, you know, and then I had to, you know, really and truly, if it wasn't for Dennis was a huge help for it all, you know, and he was without him, it would have been really tough, you know.
Yeah.
Because you have to have people helping you at the race. There's just no getting around that.
Yeah, definitely. But you know, everything comes to an end, and eventually you did sell the car in 1999. But what really kind of pushed you over the edge was what happened in Orlando at 97 in the final round against Wayne Smozanik.
Yeah. Well, that was, I think that was really more my fault than anything. I can't blame anybody but me. I needed some work done. I used to take my car over to a guy's shop named Ray Miller. And so Ray was working on the car, doing the things he needed to do. And I needed to do some work on the front of the engine, which required me to, one of the things was to torque down the balancer. Because back then we ran a fluid dampener and ran the pulley on the fluid dampener. Well, because I'm also trying to run a business and the phone's ringing off the hook, you know, everybody's needing to talk to me about something, and I got distracted and I did not torque down the harmonic balancer. And I should have known something was wrong at the racetrack, because when we would put our timing light on, it didn't hold the timing correctly, not realizing the balancer was slipping on the crankshaft. Because you had two keyways that was on the balancer, and it was going back and forth so much it was wobbling out the hub. And it lasted for the entire race up until the last round, and I was running Wayne in the final. And I was out in front up to about the 8th mile, and next thing I know, all the power just fell out. And it's because the belt came off. And when the belt came off, it's because the balancer came off. And it lost all the power, and Wayne just drove right by me like I was sitting still. You know, and it's fine. I'm glad that he won, you know, considering Wayne now today, you know, I'm all good with it. But you know, that was just my fault, just because it just goes to show you, when you're working on something, you got to be left alone, you know, and that was my fault.
Yeah, but it ended up damaging the crankshaft.
Yeah, it damaged the crank, and I had to get a new crank, new balancer, and all that. And Wayne and I were kind of pretty good friends, and he called me up and he goes, "Hey man, there's a race over here in down south, you know, down in Moroso." He goes, "We're going to it. You going to go?" And I thought, "Yeah, I'll go." And I bought the tickets. I was ready to go and everything. And then at the last minute, something just said, you know, because everybody was pushing for our cars to be updated, because we all had mild steel chassis cars. And they said, you can't go over 150 mile an hour without it being a chrome moly chassis. And that's ringing in our ears. And they're saying, we're going to start telling people you can't race if you don't meet the requirements, because they wanted that sticker on that car. Back then, it wasn't like it is today, you know. And so I thought, you know what, I'm just going to sell this car and build me a new car that's chrome moly. And sure enough, I sold it, got way more money than I thought I was going to get out of it, and I was out of racing for a little while because of it. Because again, I'm running a business, and you just always think, well, you're just going to wait until you get more money or make more money, and it's just, you know, you never get to that point. It's kind of like you just got to do it if you're going to do it.
Right. So pretty much it was a combination of, you know, the safety aspect, everybody wanting you to change the whole and chassis of the car to bring it up to a newer safety standard, and it just made the whole car outdated.
Yeah, the only thing that was really usable on the car was the body, because the chassis was really all junk, because it was all mild steel. And they wanted you to have a chrome moly chassis, because they said in order to go this fast, you're going to have chrome moly. And you have to have so many bars and so many thicknesses, and go buy yourself a book and learn it, so you get this thing fixed. And that's what I thought. I'm just going to build me a new car, probably update the motor, because I had a water block. And I'm blowing freeze plugs out. I finally stopped running freeze plugs or water in the block, you know, because that just does not work with blowers. So I knew I needed, you know, some billet, or not. Back then they didn't really have billet like they do now, but I had to get me some solid blocks and heads, and that would have made a difference.
Right. And when you sold the car, I remember you told me there was the guy bought it sight unseen as a turnkey car because he had to have it.
Yeah, I put the car in a national dragster, and they saw it in the national dragster, and he calls me up on the phone. He goes, "Hey, some guy that I represent wants to buy your car, and I'm going to be buying it for him, and we're going to send it to his address." I thought, okay, no problem. So, and the guy never even drove the car. He just bought it because he wanted it for whatever reason. And the guy who actually was talking to me on the phone ended up with the car, and they said they couldn't drive it because they didn't understand the gas pedal, the finessing. They said no matter what they did, no matter where they were at the track, they're going down the track, the tires would spin. I said, put slicks on it. End your problem, you know, if that was that bad, you know. It's just, but you know, they were bracket racers that decided to run a fast car. They didn't really understand what we were doing and everything, but I guess they took the motor out and put it in a dragster and went top dragster racing or just whatever it was.
Right. And then when you sold the car, did you know for a fact that you were ever going to get back into racing, or were you burned out at that point?
I kind of thought for a little while, I thought, you know, I'm going to take a break, because every time I worked in the car, it was just me. And it was tough, you know, just me working on the car. I didn't really have anybody working on it during the week or the weekends getting ready for the race the following week. You know, Dennis had a life, you know, he had stuff he had to do, so it wasn't like he could be devoted so much on the maintenance side of it like he could go in the races. It was tough just for him to go away for, you know, 4 days, you know, sometimes 5 days, because you'd be leaving on a Thursday, you wouldn't be back home till Monday, you know.
Right. Yeah, and then you also, you had to give up a lot family-wise with the car, because you did a lot of the car shows for Make-A-Wish Foundation too.
Yeah, because of the poster, I had a little bit of recognition, and a lot of people liked looking at the car because it was a unique color, plus the poster and everything. So I had a guy that used to put on car shows for the Make-A-Wish Foundation, and he asked me to come to them. And it was always on the dates that, you know, like the 4th of July, which was fine. You know, we would go and, you know, got to help him out, bring people in, because that's what he needed, was donations and stuff to make it all work. And
right.
It was good. It was a lot of fun. Even doing those were fun.
So even with being burned out, you knew one day you would get back into it.
I figured eventually that I would get into it, and I didn't know what level. I never thought that I was going to be building a Pro Mod car. That to me was just out of the realm of my ability. And now we got this one
right.
that
coming down the pipe.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my God, what did we do?
Yeah, we're in deep now. But yeah, well, that'll close out this chapter, and that'll get us into the first iteration of the gold Chevelle or green Chevelle, however you interpret it. You know, the color on that car, that was also a new controversy, but that'll be the next topic we traverse, will be that car.